I can imagine people wanting to skip over strategy, or maybe they don't have the time to invest in strategy as you do. What are some of those mistakes you see out there again and again?
Oftentimes, it's is not tailoring it for the platform and the audiences on that platform. Sometimes some content might perform really, really well on Instagram, and then you're wondering why the Facebook audience is responding really negatively to it. Because the quote that we use from that case study literally has the CMO saying that we listen to the audience. And that is something that I pound really hard for throughout the course because it's so important. That is the way that your content succeeds, is by listening to what the audience wants and what they're interested in.
Christina Roach, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hello, I'm Christina Roach. I teach in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Texas State University. I am per course faculty there, so I teach once a week, and then I also work full time in social media as well. I work for the city of Austin, and I do some freelance work on the sides. That's a little bit about me.
I know a lot of our students are pumped about that idea that you're working full time for the city of Austin in social media. Can you paint a picture for what that looks like and how you got into it?
I've actually been working in government for pretty much my entire career in social media, but I moved to Austin from the Dallas Fort Worth area and started working in the main city communication department and was doing managing social media for the sort of at large city of Austin account. And then in April of 2024, I moved over into our Austin Resource Recovery Department, where now I get to teach people about composting and recycling and just overall sustainability, and also sort of get to tell the stories of all of our operators who are the people who, go through the neighborhoods and get to interact with residents and such. I really enjoy getting to do the educational part of it, sort of using social media as a tool to educate people about this thing that oftentimes people think is kind of pointless and, is not really doing anything. And telling people like, this is what we're doing, this is how we're recycling your stuff, and this is how you can help, and how important zero waste is. And then also just getting talk with people and our operators and get their experiences as well. So
Awesome. So practitioner and teaching what you're practicing. Fantastic. What is the strategy that you like to implement in your current role in the city of Austin?
So anytime I get a campaign, so I work with our PIOs, our public information officers, and they are assigned campaigns from our various teams within the department. And based on those initiatives, essentially they come to me and say, Christina, we have this campaign that we need to push, and here's what we're trying to achieve. These are the objectives, and here's the desired action that we're trying to get out of it. So that might be website clicks, that might be we need people to stop putting plastic bags in their recycling bins, or we need people to stop putting batteries because, they're causing fires or whatever it might be. And so I take whatever the message is and the objectives and so on and so forth, and then I will build a strategy based on that. So how can we reach the desired outcome using social media for this campaign? And so a lot of times what I will do is kind of fuse the educational element with a little bit of fun because my personal belief has always been that just because it's government doesn't mean it has to be boring. And so I like to try to make content that people actually want to watch and that people might actually find enjoyable, but also learn something from. And so I try to sort of fuse their campaign objectives with my own sort of crazy ideas when I can. Of course, with government and, we don't have huge production teams or anything, so I can't get off all of my crazy ideas. But from time to time, I get to, be as creative as I want to be. And so yeah, that's essentially what it kind of looks like. We sort of work as a team to develop creative strategies and try to implement those on social.
Can you paint a picture of what that looks like? Because I'm imagining Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec, of course, right? When you say government plus fun, I'm thinking about that old TV show. But I know that it's not the same as it is on TV. So can you walk us through a specific campaign that had the specific objectives and how you achieved them?
The first one that comes to mind, at least with my specific role, is we had a food waste campaign that we did last year. And I essentially wanted to educate people about like other ways that you can use something like a cucumber, for example. And so what I did was I made a cute little video, literally standing in my kitchen downstairs, where I took a cucumber and was making like a cucumber water. But then I also like I had so much cucumber left because it's like all I need is a slice or two. And so I took the rest of the cucumber and I made like I made some pickles. That was a first. And then I made like a cucumber tonic. And then I put some other like extra ones on a salad. And of course, add in the element that anything that's left can also be composted. But that's an example. Like it throughout my career, I've done I remember, I don't know if anybody watching will remember, but like the Now CDs back in the day, like the well, or were they Now CD or were they Time Life? But anyway, those music CDs where they would come on super late at night. I was working for a little transportation agency, and we wanted to get all these messages out using that format. And so we converted all these transportation messages into like the songs. We essentially made a full track list where we converted all of the song titles into transportation messaging. We wrote songs, we recorded it with our team, and then we made a CD cover and then we posted it. It was actually a really fun thing. So yeah.
That sounds like so much fun. You're taking something that you love and you're sharing it, right? That's what people love to do on social media. They like to take things that they love and they like to share it. And you're doing it within the specific constraints of a cause of helping people to understand the best uses of, in this case, cucumbers. Very cool. So, strategically, have you had any big barriers or challenges that you had to overcome as you're working in this campaign driven environment?
The main challenge that we have to overcome is as government, of course, we don't have big budgets to be able to work with, super expensive influencers or buy Super Bowl ads or something, right? Like we have to work within the constraints of the funds that were allocated. And so pretty much I would say most of the work that I do is organic. And we'll use paid ads from time to time, of course. And those are allocated for different campaigns throughout the year. But most of the time, we just have to really get creative with our organic strategy. And so sometimes or oftentimes that means getting out into the streets and talking to our operators, talking to residents, going to events, recording literally on my phone, and then editing or trying to just capture things in the moment and just try to come up with creative ideas that we hope when we post it, it won't flop. That's best case scenario. Sometimes you come up with a creative idea and then you post it, it gets 25 likes. And you just have to be like, oh, success.
I know a lot of our creators listening are identifying with you right now because you have to have some of those duds to get to what works. In your opinion, based on what you've seen and based on the strategies you've implemented, what does work? Are there some key things in your mind that whenever you see a campaign take off, you think to yourself, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. I knew that.
I would say, for one, authenticity is huge. People want content that doesn't feel overly polished and that also doesn't feel like finger waggy, right? Especially coming from a government entity. They don't want to hear you say, hey, you need to be composting. You should be recycling this way. They want to know about what they're supposed to be doing. And maybe you can find a fun way to teach it to them that doesn't feel like this well-dressed executive is getting into a video and lecturing you about, the dangers of increasing waste and growing our landfills and things like that. And so, yeah, I think that for the most part, when we do content that feels like I always say the biggest compliment I get is when somebody comments and says, I can't believe this came from a government account. For me, that's like huge praise because I want it to feel like it just came from anybody else that you follow. And it is just content that you want to keep consuming. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have seen that works.
Authenticity. If it looks authentic, if it feels authentic, a lot of people struggle with authenticity though. A lot of people, whenever that camera comes on, they put on a mask or they put on a persona. Do you have advice for those folks who are listening?
Yeah, I would just say be yourself. And I know that sounds super cheesy, But the fact is, people love the imperfections. They love seeing you get nervous, or they love seeing that somebody who is on this official account, or, what they might perceive as like an official or professional creator, that they too get nervous, that they too stumble over their words or may have to find their thoughts from time to time. And so I think that, yeah, just not being afraid to be imperfect, but also to have fun with it, because one of the things that has sort of followed me throughout my career is I keep doing this because I'm having fun doing it. And so when I remember I spoke to our it's a student organization, and they said, "I can tell you love what you do. It just comes off of you." And it's like, yeah, I'm having fun. I thoroughly enjoy what I do. And so it comes off of you. So when you're having fun making your videos or whatever content you're trying to make, that comes out. People can feel it and they can see it coming off of you. So yeah, just don't be afraid to sort of let all of that ooze out of you.
Yeah. Authenticity often is bottled up. And what you're saying is lean into the fun, lean into that quirk or that strange thing that you might feel judged for. Can you give us an example of that?
I would say oftentimes, even in my lectures, I will sometimes feel self-conscious because I'm like, I lost my train of thought, or I might stumble over a word or say the incorrect word. And so I'm thinking, oh, I hope my students don't think, who is this bozo in front of them? And oftentimes, one, the students don't notice, or at least they don't bring it up, but also they're not thinking in this super like judgmental way about every little mistake that you make in your speech, or if you have a slide that I forgot to edit out this this spelling error or something like that. They're not thinking like that is an indictment on your entire credibility. And so sometimes those anxiety thoughts make you think that that's exactly what's happening, and it's not. And so, yeah, it can get like that when you're making content too, because you're thinking, I stumbled over this word, or I did a millennial pause, or something like that. And, people are so worried that everybody who watches is going to like crucify them in the comments. And in reality, the people who are watching your content are there because they want to watch your content. And then the people who don't want to watch it, most of them will scroll. Now, is it possible that people might sort of leave angry comments or hateful comments? Sure, yeah, of course, but that's anywhere, that could be in your classroom too. So yeah, it's more so just having the confidence to sort of put yourself out there and not be afraid to do it authentically.
I love that. It seems like that is a great example of something in practice that you then take into your curriculum from craft to curriculum. Can you give us some other examples of the places in your curriculum where students get excited and you see them leaning forward, you see them nodding their heads, and they're really into this module or this unit or this lecture. What are those topics for you?
One of them is definitely the social media strategy section. When we talk about social media strategy, that's when we're really going over all of the content examples that they've likely seen from big brands like Duolingo, like Wendy's, Whataburger, etc. Right? Like they see all these huge brands and the content that they're making. I'm thinking they're in this class because they want to learn how to make that kind of content. But what a lot of people don't realize, everybody always makes the comment, they need to give the social media intern a raise. But there are real professionals behind those accounts. There's a lot of strategy that goes into that content. And so I think the students want to learn about that strategy. And so they get really excited to learn about what goes into a post, what makes a post successful, how do we tap into our audience's needs and interests. And then at the end of the lecture, once we've also learned about strategic writing, we have like a SpongeBob themed assignment where they have to essentially draft a campaign and some sample posts on the re-rollout of the Krusty Krab pizza. It's literally, the whole thing is built out so that the Krusty Krab is the client, and here are the challenges that they faced, and here's what they kind of envision for the re-rollout, etc. So I think that gets the students really excited, and they get extremely creative. and they start bringing in creators and influencers that they've seen, and they're like, oh, this person would be perfect for this campaign. Sometimes they even create these really cool graphics and videos. It's just really cool. I think that's one of my favorite parts of the semester, and I really get to see the students' creativity.
I'm always inspired by what my students create, and I know that I get great satisfaction that I had maybe a small role in helping to lead them to create that. But in actuality, it's usually all of them and all their ideas that are juicy and fun. I know that we have a lot of listeners updating their portfolios now with Krusty Krab data points, right? And saying, this is what the client wanted. This was their key objective. This is their audience. And the end with the end goal of selling more of that Krusty Krab pizza, right? Can you take us back to some of those case studies you were talking about before? Because I know that those case studies can be really instructive before they actually start biting into a juicy case study that they get to take part of. These other case studies, like you mentioned, Wendy's, you mentioned some other big brand names. Can you walk us through some of those case studies that you like to use in class?
There's a module where we talk about like new tech in social, and so we talk about the Wendyverse, which is when Wendy's created this literal Wendy's inside of the metaverse. And so we talk about how they used AR, which at the time was hot and poppin', and they made a way for people who were participating or using the Oculus, well, they were called Oculus at the time, but the Meta headsets, and giving people a way to literally order chicken nuggets from the metaverse. And they had actual like cash registers and employees there, and people were in there doing the drink machines, and they have like burger shuffleboard, and they have so many things in there. But we essentially just use that as an example of how you can use this sort of technology as a way to bring your brand to where the audience already is. And then also sort of listening to like what your audience wants and what they're interested in. And so, yeah, they kind of learn that one because the quote that we use from that case study literally has the CMO saying that we listen to the audience. And that is something that I pound really hard for throughout the course because it's so important. That is the way that your content succeeds is by listening to what the audience wants and what they're interested in. But also the content that they created from it and the ways that they sort of brought their social audience to, this particular project. And yeah, the students get really excited about that, and it's just a really cool example of something that hopefully maybe they'll work for a brand that will be able to do something as cool and as big as that. But if not, then that's certainly something that they have in their creative repertoire that they can now sort of call upon and be the change wherever they decide to go work. Suggest that as an idea.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned listening. I know that that's coming up in more than one unit. Social listening tools and how to leverage them. Can you speak a little bit about what practitioners who are coming to this industry need to know about those kinds of tools and how to use them specifically?
Social listening, we do talk about, and we talk about a few different tools, but essentially that we use those to be able to stay on top of brand mentions, and to be able to sort of, if there is maybe a narrative being crafted about your brand, you can get on top of that, right? If people are saying negative things about your brand, you can kind of understand, okay, the sentiment around our brand is really negative. How can we combat that? What are the specific concerns? And also sort of using it to be able to monitor for like if there are any emergencies, right? Like when the person said they found like a shrimp head in their, what was it, like cinnamon toast crunch, right? Like stuff like that. We talk about how if you didn't have a tool to be able to monitor for things like that, then that can get out of hand and you haven't responded. And now people are not buying your cereal because they think that they're going to find shrimp in it. So it's just really important to be able to one, have a tool that will enable you to be able to monitor all of the conversations happening around your brand, but also be able to monitor for like emergencies, get an idea of brand sentiment, maybe craft strategy around that if there's something that needs to be addressed, or to maximize or capitalize, excuse me, maybe good sentiment around your brand if people are feeling really positively about something that you did or something that you offer. And yeah, and then having working for an organization that of course can afford the certain types of tools that can do those kind of things because not every organization is going to want to invest in that. As important as it is, everybody might not be able to have the funds to be able to do so.
What are some of the tools that are more on the affordable side for single practitioners or small companies? Uh, and what is the limitations of those kinds of tools?
That's a good question. Most of the tools that I'm aware of are not necessarily on the affordable side. So, like Meltwater and Sprout Social, those are the ones that we cover in class at least. But I know there are other tools, but I can't say that I know the more affordable ones.
So Meltwater and Sprout Social are good examples that you're using. What are some of the other tools in your toolkit beyond these social listening tools?
I know Sprinkler is another one. A lot of these, like Sprout Social and Sprinkler, for example, are really great for scheduling content as well as doing like responses to customer inquiries, being able to respond to mentions, messages, etc. And also, you can do listening and you could do recording. And so there's things like that. I know Hootsuite is one that some people use. In my personal line of work, a lot of the content that I post is posted natively because the brands that I manage content for aren't like, super huge, where we're getting 1,000 mentions a day or anything like that. I think that these tools are really great for brands that, or if you're representing multiple brands, right? Like having a tool like that, of course, would be helpful for listening and monitoring on those. But yeah, a lot of the content that I post is posted natively, and then I do most of my reporting by hand.
Awesome. So you're using these tools. You already mentioned one crisis. I wanted to ask about crisis communication specifically in the social media context. Do you have a process?
We have an emergency operations sort of command center that we use to respond whenever there's any sort of major crises. But for our department, for example, like we recently had the freeze. So naturally, the whole city closed for a couple of days because it was too dangerous to be on the roads, and we opened up shelters, things like that. But for our department, what we normally would do is I work with my manager, and then our entire department has sort of a chat where we essentially circle up to get aligned on what our comms are going to be. And so once we have that messaging, we work with our PIO manager, who, their team is sending out the press release that, of course, is going to go to the media. And then we essentially use that as like a jumping off point for our social messagings. Obviously, we would not publish a press release, just on Facebook or Nextdoor, right? Because it's not for that audience. So we would essentially use the information within that press release and convert it into a format that works for our social media audience. But of course, in a crisis, things are moving quickly. We may not be able to necessarily put it into a format that's going to be most engaging and exciting to read. But a lot of times people just want the information quickly. They don't want it in a pretty box. And so yeah, for the most part, we found that just getting the information out, people are going to share it, and then we can focus later on trying to make things exciting and engaging.
Yeah. And you just mentioned something so important, adapting to the context of the platform. Can you speak to how that's done across platforms and start with some of your most important channels?
Primarily, my department, we operate on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Nextdoor. And so for our Facebook audience, that audience tends to skew a little bit older. And so a lot of that content, we don't necessarily have to make it as like hip and poppin' as we would on some of the other channels, right? So we still make it educational. We still make sure that it's formatted for Facebook. So if we're doing graphics, right, like I will sometimes use carousels on Instagram. Well, on Facebook, I would not do the carousels because it's just going to show up in like multiple images. It's not scrollable in the way that it would be on Instagram. So I simply would not publish it there. But what I will oftentimes do is if I'm using a carousel that has interesting information, then that is, I'll pull the content out and sort of convert that for the Facebook audience. So, and I don't have to necessarily use, like, if we're trying to use like Gen Z language or trying to be exciting, then I will simply make it more friendly and neighborly because we still want to feel like your friendly neighborhood government agency and not your authoritative government agency. And so, yeah, we will craft that message into something that sounds friendly and community focused, and then publish it with an interesting image that is not vertically oriented. It's either square, or if it is vertically oriented, it's like 4 or 5. And then for Instagram, like I said, we do carousels, but we also do reels on Instagram. Obviously, in everything we keep seeing that, video is king, and that is content that we try to make on Instagram. So we'll do videos and try to make them as short as possible because obviously, the videos that are 30 seconds or under, we've seen that those tend to perform better. You can do longer videos, but there needs to be a storytelling aspect to it. It needs to be interesting enough that people will want to keep watching. They're invested in the story. And so, yeah, so for Instagram, that's typically what we try to do. And then if we're not doing carousels or reels, then we will sometimes post like an interesting photo. If for example, there is like an emergency that's happening, or that maybe there's been a fire, or we know something's gonna be like maybe we had a parade or something like that and we want to share photos, then we'll share photos from that because people love seeing people. That's the other thing too, is people love seeing other humans. They don't necessarily just want to see a picture of a cart or buildings, right? Or a truck, right? They want to see other people, people being happy and smiling, and people who look regular like them. And so yeah, that's pretty much what we do for Instagram. And then LinkedIn, we take a kind of different approach on LinkedIn because we want it to still not feel so stuffy. We try to post on LinkedIn with a little bit more of a casual tone, while still maintaining the general professional vibe. And so, and of course, it depends on the content of the post. Sometimes we will skew it a little bit more professionally if we have a professional audience, like we're trying to reach industry people. But if we're just sort of doing general education, things like that, then yeah, we'll try to have fun and make it interesting. And then on Nextdoor, we're just neighborly. So we'll say, hi, neighbors. And we'll type out a message, and then sometimes we'll put an image with it. So that's pretty much how we do all of our different platforms.
I heard some strategic choices there too. Can you tell us what some of the biggest mistakes strategically people make? Like, I can imagine people wanting to skip over strategy, or maybe they don't have the time to invest in strategy as you do. What are some of those mistakes you see out there again and again?
Oftentimes, it's is not tailoring it for the platform and the audiences on that platform. Sometimes some content might perform really, really well on Instagram, and then you're wondering why the Facebook audience is responding really negatively to it. Right. And it's maybe because you're referencing a TikTok trend or a trend you saw on Instagram, and the Facebook audience has no idea what that is. It hasn't caught up to the platform yet. It takes a couple of weeks sometimes for things to finally get to Facebook. And so when you're trying to sort of make a reference, like you're trying to use a meme, for example, to make some content or a trending sound or whatever, different audiences on the different platforms may not be aware of it. So trying to sort of force something to work on every platform just so that you can get content out everywhere is not necessarily the best idea. I think that we all want to get content out as often as possible, and not having to do a different piece of content for every platform, is preferred, of course, because it's more work. But unfortunately, a lot of times when you're trying to do things that may only work for a specific audience, not tailoring it for a different audience or trying to put it in front of a different audience that's not going to understand will oftentimes lead to the content either completely missing the audience or flopping, or them completely misunderstanding it and maybe taking what was a well-meaning joke into something really, really negative.
I'm hearing like alignment issues in my back of my head. I'm thinking of whenever I'm looking at projects or I'm looking at strategy, and the objective is over here and their execution is over here. And you're asking, we need these aligned. Why aren't these aligned? And that's what I'm hearing when I hear these mistakes. What are some other kind of planning and campaigns mistakes that you see on the back end? You draw back that curtain for us.
I think that sometimes the sort of strategy and tactics don't necessarily align with the overall sort of objective of the campaign. Because, sometimes you see a problem and you're thinking, okay, we got to do a fun campaign on this, but maybe it's a sensitive issue. Maybe you're dealing with sensitive populations or, marginalized populations, things like that, right? So you can't come into it thinking every piece of content has to be fun and exciting. You have to think about all of the different publics that you're going to reach with this campaign and try to, tailor the content as much as you can for those audiences. And also thinking about the platforms, thinking about where the content is going to be published, who's going to be publishing it, right? If you're going to be working with certain influencers, any history that they might have with the community, things like that. I think sometimes that those kind of things are overlooked, just not considering all of those little elements. Yeah. And then I think also, yeah, I think the only other thing that I can think of would be just trying to, I don't know, try to recreate something that like a big brand made or something else that we've sort of seen go viral and try to make that into, our brand, right? Sometimes it doesn't fit. Sometimes you're trying to do the sort of spicy or like the sassy way that Duolingo or Wendy's like kind of respond on social media or like the sort of content that they make and it just would not work for our audience. We are a government entity. As cool and hip as we try to be, I think right now public trust in government is not very high. As much as we still try to make content that is cool and everything, sometimes people will still have a negative response to it. So we just have to be cognizant of that and sort of keep that idea in the back of our mind that some people may still have a negative response. So we should be aware of that and sort of ready to respond and try to restore trust in these people because a lot of people don't trust that that we're really recycling or things like that. So yeah, we try to get people to understand that yes, we are recycling. This is what we're doing with your recyclables once they're collected, so on and so forth. So yeah, that's pretty much what I see.
Yeah, I'm imagining famous case studies here where, like, for example, the CEO of BP saying, I just want to get back to my life whenever the oil spill happened, right? And on social media, we hear about things being posted but quickly deleted because they realize they made a mistake. Can you think of some examples like that where the strategy was wrong or somebody made a big mistake and this was a lesson we can learn from?
It's one of those things that, you kinda have to read the room because, at the end of the day, yes, the CEO may be like, "Oh, I'm so heartbroken that this is happening," but people have just lost their jobs, like, CEO at the end of the day gets to, go home to whatever their living situation is, but they're still employed, they have that financial security, but, all those employees who lost their job do not. And so it's one of those things when you're sort of trying to create or manufacture this authenticity and it just does not fall well on the audience. And while, yes, like more people are talking about you and your brand, but it's not in a positive way. And so, yeah, it just, yeah, puts a real stink onto your brand, unfortunately. And
That reminds me too of the Coldplay couple, if you recall, right? Where they were caught and the fallout that ensued from that, where they're losing means of living and whatnot. Can you think of other examples of social media management in times of adversity like that?
Actually, funnily enough, we talked about the astronomer response to the Coldplay sort of scandal and felt like their response actually was really, really good. They made a video with Gwyneth Paltrow, who is the ex-wife of the Coldplay singer, and then also they essentially sort of made a statement without making a statement. It was like, we're going to get back to regularly scheduled programming and we're going to get back to what we do best. And if anybody has questions about what we do, then feel free to ask. And so, yeah, their response was kind of cool because they made it sort of funny and like upbeat without necessarily getting into the allegations specifically. They kind of did a really good job of sort of reading the moment. The other thing that we talk about in class is that they primarily serve they're a B2B company, right? So they don't necessarily serve consumers. And so for the most part, they're not necessarily going to be hurt by sort of people being angry, on social media. That's not to say nothing will happen, of course, because scandal is scandal. Like it's going to hurt your brand. If people decided, oh, I'm not going to buy your products or whatever, they wouldn't even necessarily know how to do that because, for the most part, they are accepting contracts with other businesses. Their response was really great. I think if it was any other brand, like if it was McDonald's or something like that, then I think it would be a very different story.
Can you think of other examples that are not just good like that one, but where they knocked it out of the park and you were like, that is some great social media management. That is some great PR. I'm going to put that in my class, right?
Yeah, let me think. A lot of the inspiration that I take is from other government agencies because of course I work in government and I think that government can be some of the hardest audiences, because of course everything you do is public record, and so people are really interested to know that you're of course being good stewards of the funds and such. And so I believe it's Oklahoma Department of Wildlife or Texas Department of Wildlife, whatever it is, where they had the viral tweet that was like, someone said, if not friend, why friend shaped? And they were telling them not to touch. It was like a wild animal. So they do a really good job with their content. I also like, I believe it's the Washington Department of Transportation. They do really great content informing people about whether it's road closures or different road projects that they're doing. They're super good at making content that's both educational and fun, but still from a government organization.
Can you give us an example there from Washington?
I have one where they kind of did this like explainer video about turnabouts, and it was like it seems hard. It was I think it was like things that seem hard but are not. And then they literally had like one of those tearaway like presentation pads, and then they drew it out by hand and were showing like this is how you do a turnabout, and like this is what you're supposed to do, and here's how you do that, and all that. So they did that. They also did like a sort of The Office style video explaining some project that they were going to be working on. They do a lot of really like just hilarious videos trying to make it interesting.
I love good examples. You can show a student or a practitioner a good example and say, this is the goal. This is the end goal. And a lot of times you don't see all the work that went into coming to that execution. You don't see the strategy meetings. You don't see the coordination amongst public relations of people and social media people. You don't see all that work that went into it. You just see the hit and you see the numbers behind that hit, right? I know AI has changed the way that you've worked, whether behind the scenes like that or in the actual executions. Can you speak to how AI has changed the landscape in what you do?
A lot of what I like to sort of use AI for, I'm really huge into numbers and data. And one of the things that I do by hand is I will download and aggregate all of the data for all of the content in a given month, and then we sort of analyze it by quarter. And then I like to try to sort of pull qualitative insights from that. Oh, another thing I like to do is a social media audit. So I will use AI tools. ChatGPT is one example to sort of help me to like categorize the content, or and obviously you have to watch for hallucinations and such. But yeah, like if there was any emergent patterns, or like sometimes I'll have it calculate, not calculate, but it'll sort of give me like, okay, this content was most engaging or whatever, right? So sometimes I'll use it for things like that. Sometimes I'll sort of spitball my ideas out and just say like, does this even make sense the way that I'm explaining it? Sometimes you just need a sanity check. But I know there are tons of AI tools like built into like content management systems now. And so they're helping you do things like craft your content or come up with KPIs or things like that, right? They're literally built into these platforms to help you to move through your workflows faster, and also help you if if you need to respond to questions from customers or mentions, things like that, then it'll sort of suggest wording for your response and things like that. So yeah, I think that yeah, AI can help sort of make things work, or make your work move a little bit faster so you don't have to do so many individual tasks.
Has it surprised you? Because I'm thinking you're going through a social media audit and you're putting it into the machine and you're saying, what is it going to highlight here? Is it ever counterintuitive? Can you think of any aha moments that you've had in working with AI?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of it's a little bit of a balance. Like sometimes I get something really good, and I'm like, "What? I never even thought of that." And then sometimes it's like where did you even get that from? Like, I'll spend so much time just sort of being like, no, let's refine. Let's keep refining until we get what it is that we're trying to get, or things like that. I'll sometimes will sort of ask, like, how can I turn all of these, like, I have 25 categories. I need some overarching pillars that these categories can belong to, so that I don't have, 25 categories anymore. Now I have 4 pillars, and then we've put them into different categories, things like that. And sometimes it does a really good job. Sometimes it repeats itself. It just really depends on how it's feeling that day. But yeah, I know other people use tools that they have found more success with. Like, I know people like Claude, for example. I've not used Claude, so I don't know if it's much better or not. But yeah, I kind of have a sort of 50-50 experience with ChatGPT.
Yeah, so ChatGPT is your main go-to right now?
Mhm.
And have you ever explored some of the custom GPT things in the GPT store there, specific to social
Yeah.
media?
Yeah, I actually made a custom GPT, because I was curious about it. I didn't even know that you could do it when I first was sort of perusing ChatGPT. I had no idea you could, like, make your own. So I literally plugged in, a bunch of our content. Like, I, like, pulled it from a spreadsheet and was like, "Here, let's get you trained on our brand voice, and here's some of our general guidelines, and here's the kind of tone we like to go for. This is the kind of word count we like to go for, so on and so forth." And so, yeah, essentially gave it all that information and then just kind of let it build its own framework, and then started using that to sort of like spit out whether it's ideas or content topics, things like that, to sort of help me build my content calendar. So, yeah, it's kind of cool. It's a really cool thing that you can teach it to do exactly what you already do instead of just the more generic tool.
Yeah. I created a more generic social media manager because I'm not working with a brand voice. I'm trying to help students learn how to use and leverage social media. And I'm hearing how you have leveraged it with these specific guidelines. And that's inspiring because I imagine the time savings in templatizing, right? Because a lot of what you're doing is okay, templatize, but then check to make sure it's aligning with the brand voice, the brand goals, and that specific public or audience that you're working towards reaching. Have you had any problems in those processes that you've implemented with the custom GPTs or with AI?
The only problems that I've sort of run into are with, like, the accuracy of some of the content. Like, there are certain words or like names that we have for certain services. So it doesn't know that, obviously, and so it'll, like, sometimes it'll spit out a name or whatever, and I have to correct it and say, actually, we call that service this. There's no way it could know that unless I told it. So yeah, it's just essentially like stuff that I left out when I was feeding it, that it's I have to essentially go back in and be like, "Okay, actually, I forgot to mention this specific thing." But other than that, for the most part, it's okay. Like, it will give me what I'm looking for. And yeah, it'll give me some cool, like, topics that I didn't even sort of think of. So yeah.
Awesome. What's the best advice you have for someone who wants to do what you do, who sees and hears this conversation and says, I want to be a social media manager just like Christina? How do I get there?
So, a couple of things that I pretty much always tell my students is, one, go somewhere where you will have fun doing what you're doing, or you can make it fun in some way. I never thought that transportation would ever be a fun topic that I could make social media content about, but we made it fun. Find the fun in what you're doing. Don't be afraid to, of course, like, unless you work in an industry where you can't, it doesn't make sense, then obviously, be within the guidelines. But otherwise, don't, just because they tell you that traditionally we have gone very, very stiff on social, doesn't mean it has to stay that way. It's okay to inject some personality into social media, especially if you want to stand out. That's one. Two, I always say network, find connections. And I know everybody says the same thing, but it's, the thing I always tell the students is, right now, while you're in school, it is so cute for you to go on LinkedIn and find somebody who's like 10, 20 years into their career and say, I want to be just like you. I want to build my career exactly like yours. I too want to be a CMO someday, or whatever it is. that is so adorable coming from a student. Not to say it's not adorable coming from someone like me. A lot of times, these professionals do want to mentor young professionals coming into the field, and they have a lot of knowledge. And so I think that sometimes we're afraid that one day you'll reach out for a coffee chat and they'll say, I don't know, there's like a fear that they're going to be like, no, how dare you even ask? And I always say the worst thing that they're going to do is ignore you. And that is fine. Just keep sending out more messages to people who you admire. And eventually somebody will say, yes, absolutely would love to have a coffee chat with you, or you're welcome to come and shadow me, whatever it is. And then lastly, you don't have to live, eat, and breathe social media all the time. Do not prioritize it over taking care of yourself, over your relationships. I've seen so many social media managers respond to these. What's the craziest place you sent a social media post or you posted from social media or whatever? And they'll say, I was writing a post in my wedding dress, or like, I was about to give birth, please don't do that. It is okay. I know social media like moves, at the speed of light, but truly, 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 it is okay. If you miss one trend, there will always be another one. So it really is fine. I know that I always say like social media doesn't close, it doesn't have holiday hours. Like there's always something being posted. So sometimes you'll work for organizations that might be like, well, that's just part of your role. You have to respond to messages after hours, or you have to respond to comments. And yeah, that's true. But I just don't want anyone to prioritize it over their own health and their own like important things in life, because yeah, you have to set some boundaries somewhere.
What is the biggest difference in your approaches on paid versus organic?
This is a good question. So we're actually sort of shifting that this year because a lot of our organic content, I think I put more effort into sometimes making it fun and exciting, particularly when it's being posted on Instagram, because I know that that's for the most part where it'll do the best. And so, yeah, our organic content has a little bit more design put into it, or we'll try to make videos and things like that. And our paid content is essentially just we'll use a static image or we'll use a carousel and we just put some post copy with it. For the most part, it does not deviate from that typical formula of not generic, but campaign specific post copy and static image. But one of the goals that we had for this upcoming fiscal year is that we wanna have more fun with our ads, I actually was inspired by Cat Metro, which is a transit authority in Austin, and I keep coming across their ads, and they do these really cool videos about, showing people what it's like to ride the bus and to ride the train and how cool that is, and obviously, as a transportation nerd from my very first internship, I'm excited by that, but also it's just so cool to see a government agency doing ads that are trying to make people both excited about transit, but also like entertained by this content. So I wanted to do that. So one of my goals this year is to try to do paid content that is exciting and that teaches people about recycling, about composting, food waste, et cetera, et cetera. And it is fun. It's cool, it's hip, and people want to click on it. And maybe even start discourse in the comment section. I welcome it all because I love engagement.
Engagement is never bad, is it?
Exactly.
What are some examples of things that maybe you have done to network? And what are some examples of things that help students to take initiative? I know that on the top 10 skills list, every time I see it for the past decades, one of the number one things that employers want is somebody who, quote, takes initiatives. All the other ones are communication skills. And I'm not just saying that because I teach communication. The only one that you could argue is not communication is takes initiative. So, how does that play into your networking? And can you give us an example of taking initiative?
When I was first, like very early in my career, I wanted to move from my first official full-time job. I wanted to move into this other role, which was with the city of Dallas. And at the time, I didn't have any sort of connection to the city of Dallas, but I was really excited about this opportunity because having grown up 30 minutes away from Dallas, I just thought it was this huge city. I was like, I can't wait to work there one day. And so I remember I went to this conference It's called 3CMA. And I ended up meeting two of the literally the director of communications in the city of Dallas and the manager who she's directly under the director. And I ended up just connecting with them. I sat with them throughout the conference. I talked with them and just chatted about like my career, what I do in my role, things like that. Fast forward, they ended up opening up a role, which they had posted it prior, like a few months before I met them. And I had applied for that role, but unfortunately I was turned down. And so I was, I was disappointed, but I made this connection with them and I kind of told them that I had applied for that role before. In the future, when they finally were hiring somebody else on that team, I applied again. And it was interesting because when I interviewed with them, they were like, "Oh, it's you." They were so excited to see me, and I was like, "Yeah, oh my god, nice to meet you again." So it was kind of like a reunion when we had that interview. And so I was able to both relax like in the interview, but also just be able to talk more freely about what I have done and my accomplishments. And they told me later that it actually was between me and one other person, and that other person just happened to be like a touch more nervous than me. And because I was able to speak more confidently in that moment, I was able to convince them that I was the right fit for the role. And so yeah, I got to work at the city of Dallas. They made the offer, and so I was there for a few years through some of the biggest years, the most crazy years in the city of Dallas with COVID and tornadoes and protests. So many things happened in those 2.5 years. But yeah, it was just really like heartwarming that I was able to get that just by making a connection with people.
You never know where that connection might lead, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. And you have a story about taking initiative too, right?
Yeah. So my mom she's worked in PR my whole life. And she has her own, or she had at the time, she had her own small business where she was doing PR consulting. And the year that I was turning 18, I believe, they were having a Super Bowl in Arlington. And so my mom, being someone who has worked a lot throughout the city of Arlington, which she worked with the Arlington Chamber of Commerce as well, she essentially she's like, I want to be part of this big project. And so she got on the phone with people, she was calling everybody she needed to call, whoever needed she told me, "I got on the phone and just asked, 'How can I be involved in this project?'" She was sending emails to people, whatever she needed to do. And so when it came out and they were looking for contractors to help them on various different things, because there's a lot of logistics that go into hosting a Super Bowl in a city, she actually was selected. She literally got to work. She's in the rooms with like Troy Aikman. She's in the room with these people talking logistics and talking about how we can connect the Super Bowl with small businesses and making sure that we are highlighting the small businesses in Arlington that are in the area because they're going to be affected, of course, by all the street closures and things like that. So she's making sure to make their focus like how they can support small businesses and also marketing these small businesses and raising their profile. And yeah, so she essentially was able to get on this project just by making the calls, promoting herself, not being afraid to put herself out there. And yeah, she just was just so iconic in that. And now she has that on her resume forever.
That's awesome. It's such an inspiring story. I love inspiring stories that people can take and be inspired by. Do you have any other inspiring stories to share with us?
s- Many. I can tell you that another story I tell my students is that when I was in undergrad, there was another internship that I had previously applied for, and unfortunately, I did not get the role. But I essentially based all of my work around this organization, and so because I was like, this could be building my portfolio. All of these assignments. A lot of times they'll say choose a brand or a company that you like and do whatever it is. It might be create a pitch or, do a presentation about them, whatever it is. And so I often will tell the students, you gotta, like, if there's a brand that you're interested in, you could build your entire portfolio based on them and they will see the work that you have already done and it's already in their brand, colors and all of that. Anyway, so I did that and I showed it to them. I reached out to them. There was a project that we were supposed to do where we're presenting the brand to the class and sort of introducing what they do, um, who they are, like, et cetera, what they sell, things like that. And so I reached out to the manager who had reached out to me previously, and I said, I'm interested in doing this, and I want to make this kind of video, and I'm doing a presentation, but you told me that you all have all these cool giveaways. I would love to like get some of those and maybe hand them out to the class. And so I did. So she organized all of that. She connected me with the person who was able to give me some little goodies. And then once it was over, she said, "Well, send me all of the stuff. Like we would love to really see it. Maybe we could like use it in our communications or whatever." And so I sent it over to her. She sent it over to the director. And then I was not really expecting anything to come from it, but they ended up calling me like a little bit later and they said, "Hey, we have another internship opening and we would love to have you." And so they actually brought me on as another intern and I was there and I got to do when it was another local government agency, but they were responsible for the rollout of text to 911 in the entire like North Central Texas region. And so I essentially got to work on all of the like comms related to text to 911 in North Central Texas just because I was so obsessed with them, like built all my projects around them and continued to be in contact with them throughout the time when I was an undergrad. And that was just me at a community college just with a whole bunch of delusion. I was able to do that and yeah, that's like one of the proudest moments of my career. I always tell the students like don't be afraid to be audacious, be delusional. Like literally, if you just put yourself out there, eventually somebody will see it and they'll be excited and would love to give you an opportunity.
Excellent. And I heard follow your obsession too. Like whatever it is that really lights you up, you should follow that call,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Christina Roach, where can we find you online?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Christina G. Roach is my handle, or you can find me just at Christina Roach on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter as well, very lightly at Christina G. Roach as well. You can follow me there. I don't post that much, but yeah, would love to connect.
Awesome. Christina, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom, your insights, and your stories with our students. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.